the blade pressed against her throat, cold as winter iron. "You have exactly 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't gut you like a fish and leave your body for the vultures." Clementine Ashford didn't blink. She didn't cry. She'd spent her entire life learning that tears were a currency that bought nothing in her world. "Because," she whispered, blood trickling down her neck where the steel bit too deep, "your alpha's son put this child in my belly, and if you kill me, you kill the only heir the Blackwood bloodline will ever have." The rogue's yellow eyes widened. Behind her, the Ashford border guards who had thrown her into this wasteland were already riding away, their mission complete. She had been nothing but bait. And now she was going to die in enemy territory, carrying the child of a man who had sworn to love her forever, and then watched his own father banish her to this death. But what nobody knew, what nobody could have predicted, was that 300 miles away, Ezekiel Blackwood was already saddling his horse, a rifle across his back and murder in his heart. He was coming for her, and God help anyone who stood in his way. Now, before we go any further into this story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from so I can send you a virtual hug. I read every single comment, and I promise you by the end of this story you're going to need that hug. Trust me on this one. Also, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell because stories like this one, they don't come around often and you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because you need to understand how a woman like Clementine Ashford ended up with a knife at her throat, pregnant with an heir, and abandoned by everyone she ever trusted. 3 months earlier, the Ashford territory was celebrating the harvest moon. Now, you need to understand something about the Ashford family. They weren't just wealthy, they were the kind of wealthy that builds empires. The kind that makes kings nervous. The kind that forgets what hunger feels like because they've never known it. Obadiah Ashford ruled his territory with an iron fist covered in a velvet glove. He smiled at his enemies right before he destroyed them. He toasted to their health right before he poisoned their wells. And he loved his daughter, his legitimate daughter Prudence, more than life itself. Clementine, however, was not his legitimate daughter. She was the daughter of a servant. A woman named Harriet who had caught Obadiah's eye one cold winter night when his wife was away visiting relatives. Harriet had been 16, beautiful and powerless. She died giving birth to Clementine. And Obadiah, rather than acknowledging his sin, did what powerful men have done since the beginning of time. He buried the truth. He took the baby and gave her to the kitchen staff to raise. He let his wife believe Clementine was an orphan they had taken in out of Christian charity. But Clementine knew the truth. She had always known. The servants whispered. The mirrors didn't lie. She had her father's eyes, those distinctive gray-green eyes that marked the Ashford bloodline as clearly as a brand marks cattle. Growing up, she watched her half-sister Prudence learn to dance, to read, to play the piano. She watched Prudence receive silk dresses and diamond earrings. She watched Prudence entertain suitors in the parlor while she scrubbed the floors outside. But Clementine didn't grow bitter. No, she grew smart. She learned to read by stealing books from the library. She learned mathematics by listening at the schoolroom door. She learned politics by serving at dinner parties and keeping her ears open while powerful men assumed she was invisible. By the time she was 20 years old, Clementine Ashford knew more about the workings of her father's territory than any of his advisors. And she knew something else too. She knew that the Blackwood territory to the north was not the savage wasteland everyone claimed it to be. You see, the Ashfords and the Blackwoods had been at war for 3 generations. It started with a land dispute, escalated into bloodshed, and calcified into hatred so deep that neither side remembered why they were fighting anymore. They just knew they hated each other. The border between the 2 territories was a no-man's land. A place of rogues and outlaws, murderers and thieves. Anyone caught crossing it was considered a traitor and killed on sight. But Clementine, in her years of listening and learning, had discovered something that would change everything. There was a trade route, secret one. For all their public hatred, the Ashfords and the Blackwoods had been trading goods through intermediaries for decades. Weapons, medicine, technology. things that neither territory could produce on its own. And the man who controlled this trade route was none other than Obadiah Ashford himself. Her father was getting rich off his supposed enemies. Now, Clementine could have used this information to destroy him. She could have exposed his hypocrisy, turned his people against him, watched him burn. But what would that have gained her? No, Clementine had a better plan. She was going to use that trade route to escape. She was going to cross into Blackwood territory and start a new life, far from the man who had never acknowledged her, far from the sister who pretended she didn't exist, far from the prison of her own birth. And that's exactly what she was doing, sneaking across the border under cover of darkness on a moonless September night, when she ran directly into him. Ezekiel Blackwood, the heir to the Blackwood territory, the son of the most dangerous man in the north, and quite possibly the most beautiful man Clementine had ever seen. He had a rifle pointed at her face. "Give me one good reason not to pull this trigger," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Clementine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But she'd spent her entire life hiding her fear. She wasn't about to stop now. "Because I'm worth more to you alive," she said. "Is that so?" His eyes, dark as midnight, deep as wells, studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "And who exactly are you?" She considered lying. She considered making up a story about being a simple traveler, a refugee, a nobody. But something in his gaze told her he would see through any deception. "My name is Clementine Ashford," she said. "I'm the illegitimate daughter of Obadiah Ashford. And I'm running away from everything I've ever known." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Ashford," he repeated, like the word was poison on his tongue. "I didn't choose my blood," she said quickly. "But I can choose my future. And I choose not to spend another day in that man's shadow." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Ezekiel lowered his rifle. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Maybe I'm both." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or recognition. Whatever it was, it made Clementine's breath catch in her throat. "Come with me," he said. "My father will want to meet you." And just like that, Clementine Ashford walked into the heart of enemy territory with the heir to her father's greatest rival. She had no idea that she was walking into the greatest love story of her life. Or the greatest tragedy. Ezekiel didn't bind her hands or blindfold her. He simply walked beside her through the dark forest, occasionally glancing over to make sure she was keeping up. "You're not afraid," he observed after an hour of silent walking. "Should I be? Most people would be. Most people would be begging for their lives by now." Clementine shrugged. "I've learned that begging doesn't get you very far." He stopped walking and turned to look at her. Really look at her, for the first time since they'd met. "Who taught you that lesson?" She met his gaze without flinching. "My father. Though he doesn't know he taught me anything. He doesn't even acknowledge I exist." Something shifted in Ezekiel's expression. The suspicion was still there, but now there was something else beneath it. Understanding, maybe. Or compassion. "My father," he said slowly, "acknowledges me too much. Every breath I take, every step I make, every decision, he's watching, judging, finding me wanting. At least he sees you." Sometimes being seen is its own kind of prison. They stood there in the darkness, two strangers from warring families, and for one impossible moment, they understood each other perfectly. Then Ezekiel cleared his throat and gestured forward. "The camp is just ahead. Whatever happens next, don't show fear. These men can smell it." The Blackwood territory wasn't what Clementine had expected. She'd heard stories all her life about the barbarians of the north. They ate their enemies' hearts, the servants whispered. They drank blood for breakfast. They sacrificed children to pagan gods. But what she found was a community. Families gathered around fires. Children playing in the dirt. Women laughing as they hung laundry. Men repairing tools and trading stories. It looked almost exactly like home. Except for one thing. Everyone, every single person, stopped what they were doing when Ezekiel walked past. And they didn't just look. They watched, with a reverence that bordered on worship. "They love you," Clementine murmured. "They fear my father," Ezekiel corrected. "The love, if it exists, is just a reflection of that fear. You don't believe that." He glanced at her sideways. "You've known me for 2 hours. You don't know what I believe. I know you could have shot me back there. You didn't. I know you could have tied my hands and dragged me here like a prisoner. You didn't. I know you could have been cruel, and instead you've been almost kind." Ezekiel stopped walking. "Don't make the mistake of thinking kindness and weakness are the same thing," he said quietly. "My father has killed men for lesser assumptions. I didn't say it was weakness. I said it was kindness. There's a difference." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, incredibly, he smiled. It transformed his entire face. The hard lines softened. The dangerous edges faded. He looked young suddenly. Young and almost hopeful. "You're going to be trouble," he said. "I've been told that before. I bet you have." He led her toward the largest tent in the camp, and Clementine prepared herself to meet the monster of her childhood nightmares. Jedediah Blackwood, Alpha of the North, Scourge of the Borderlands, the man who had killed her grandfather in single combat and displayed his head on a pike for 7 days. She was about to find out if the legends were true. Jedediah Blackwood was 73 years old, and he looked like death had given up trying to claim him. His hair was white as snow, but his eyes, those same midnight eyes his son had inherited, were sharp as broken glass. He sat in a wooden chair carved with symbols Clementine didn't recognize, wrapped in furs despite the warmth of the fire, and he watched her approach with the patient hunger of a predator who knows his prey can't escape. "An Ashford," he said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "In my camp." "How unexpected." Clementine bowed her head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of his power. It was a subtle difference, but she suspected he would notice. He did. "Interesting," he murmured. "You bow but don't break. Where did you learn that, girl?" "From watching my father's enemies, sir. The ones who survived learned to bend without breaking. The ones who didn't." She let the sentence hang. Jedediah's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Your father has many enemies. How do I know you're not one of his spies?" "You don't. But I can offer you something more valuable than trust." "And what is that?" "Information. I know about the trade route. I know about the intermediaries. I know about every shipment that's passed between our territories for the last 10 years. The tent went silent. Ezekiel's hand dropped to his weapon. 2 guards at the entrance tensed. Even the fire seemed to dim. But Jedediah Blackwood didn't move. He just studied her with those terrible, knowing eyes. "And why would you betray your own father?" he asked finally. "Because he's not my father. Not in any way that matters. He's the man who used my mother and discarded her like trash. He's the man who raised me as a servant in my own home. He's the man who would sacrifice me without a second thought if it served his interests." He paused. "And soon enough, I suspect that's exactly what he'll try to do." "What makes you think that?" "Because my sister is about to marry. Political alliance. Her husband will want heirs, and he'll want to make sure there are no rival claims to the Ashford fortune. I'm an inconvenience at best and a threat at worst. My days were numbered the moment that engagement was announced." Jedediah leaned forward. "So you came here to save yourself." "I came here because I had nowhere else to go. But now that I'm here, I'm offering you something valuable. The question is whether you're smart enough to take it." She heard Ezekiel inhale sharply behind her. No one talked to his father like that. No one. But Jedediah Blackwood threw back his head and laughed. It was a terrible sound, rusty from disuse, dark with echoes of cruelty, but it was genuine. "Oh, I like you," he said when he finally stopped. "You've got more spine than half my generals." Ezekiel, where did you find this creature? Crossing the border, father. She walked right into my patrol. And you didn't kill her. She was persuasive. Jedediah's eyes moved between his son and Clementine, and something flickered in their depths. Something calculating. She'll stay, he announced. She'll be given quarters in the main compound. And she'll be your responsibility, Ezekiel. If she's a spy, you'll be the one to discover it. And if she's not. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Clementine had ever seen. Well, we'll see what use we can make of her. And so Clementine Ashford found herself a guest in the house of her enemies, under the watchful eye of a man who made her heart race every time he entered the room. She told herself it was fear. She was lying. Weeks passed. Clementine proved herself valuable, just as she'd promised. She shared information about Ashford's supply lines, guard rotations, and political alliances. She identified weaknesses in her father's defenses and opportunities for Blackwood expansion. But she also did something else. Something unexpected. She became part of the community. She helped the women with their work. Not because she was ordered to, but because she remembered what it was like to have no one to talk to. She taught the children to read, using techniques she'd developed while learning in secret. She listened to the elders' stories and remembered the names of everyone she met. And slowly, imperceptibly, the Blackwood territory began to accept her. All except for Ezekiel. He watched her constantly. He questioned her motives. He tested her loyalty in a dozen subtle ways. He was suspicious and cold and maddeningly beautiful, and Clementine couldn't stop thinking about him. It was a problem. You're staring, he said one evening, appearing beside her at the communal fire. I'm thinking. About what? About whether you're ever going to stop treating me like an enemy. He sat down next to her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. You are an enemy. Your blood makes you one. My blood is half Ashford, half nobody. That's what they told me my whole life. So which half is the enemy? He turned to look at her, and for the first time, his expression wasn't guarded or suspicious. It was confused. Who told you that you were nobody? He asked. Everyone. Always. My father never acknowledged me. My sister pretended I didn't exist. The servants either pitied me or resented me. I was a ghost in my own home. You're not a ghost now. No. No. He hesitated, then continued. The people here, they talk about you. They say you work harder than anyone. They say you never complain. They say you remember their names, their stories, their children's birthdays. I know what it's like to be forgotten. I don't want anyone else to feel that way. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. My mother was like that. Before she died. She remembered everyone. She made everyone feel seen. What happened to her? Ashford raiders. I was 12. They caught her traveling between villages and... He stopped, swallowed hard. My father has never been the same since. Neither have I. Clementine's heart clenched. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. My father ordered those raids. For years. That makes it my fault, at least a little. You were a child. So were you. And you still carry it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted between them. The wall he'd built came crumbling down, just a little. I don't know what to do with you, Clementine Ashford, he said quietly. You're not what I expected. You're not what anyone expected. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's the most dangerous thing of all. He stood up then and walked away without another word. But Clementine saw him glance back over his shoulder. And she saw something in his eyes that made her blood sing with hope and terror in equal measure. He was starting to feel something too. It happened on a night when the moon was full and the air smelled of autumn. Ezekiel found her at the edge of camp, sitting on a fallen log and staring at the stars. You should be inside, he said. It's not safe out here. I'm not afraid. Maybe you should be. She laughed softly. Ezekiel, I spent 20 years being afraid. Afraid of my father, afraid of being discovered, afraid of being thrown out with nothing. At some point you just get tired of fear. He sat down beside her, closer than he needed to. Their shoulders were almost touching. I think about you, he said suddenly. More than I should. Her heart stopped. What do you mean? I mean I can't sleep because I'm wondering if you're warm enough. I can't focus in meetings because I'm thinking about how you laughed at something Cornelia said yesterday. I can't look at you without wanting. He broke off, jaw tight. Wanting what? He turned to face her, and his eyes were blazing with something fierce and vulnerable. Wanting everything. All of you. Every moment, every thought, every breath. I want to know what you dream about and what you're afraid of. I want to hear your voice first thing in the morning and last thing at night. I want. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers trembling. I want you, Clementine. And it terrifies me. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel. I want you too, she whispered. I've wanted you since that first night when you had a rifle pointed at my head and I thought I was going to die. That's insane. Probably. Our families have been at war for generations. I know. My father would kill us both if he found out. I know that too. Then why? She leaned forward and kissed him. It was impulsive and reckless and absolutely perfect. His lips were warm against hers, and when he pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like he would never let go, she felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she had finally come home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ezekiel pressed his forehead against hers. This is going to end badly, he said. Probably. I don't care. Neither do I. And so began the secret that would change everything. For 3 months, they loved each other in shadows. They met in secret places. A hidden clearing in the forest, an abandoned cabin by the river, a cave that only they knew about. They stole hours from their days and minutes from their nights, always looking over their shoulders, always aware that discovery meant death. But in those stolen moments they were free. Ezekiel told her about his mother, about the woman who had sung lullabies and baked bread and taught him that strength didn't have to mean cruelty. He told her about his father's expectations, the crushing weight of being the only heir, the fear that he would never be enough. Clementine told him about her childhood, about watching through windows as other children played, about teaching herself to read by candlelight, about the day she finally understood that she would never be acknowledged, never be loved, never be anything but a shameful secret. They learned each other's scars and built something beautiful in the spaces between them. And then Clementine discovered she was pregnant. She knew immediately. Her body had never felt like this before. The exhaustion, the nausea, the strange tenderness in her breasts. She was carrying Ezekiel's child. The heir to the Blackwood territory was growing inside her. She was terrified. But when she told Ezekiel, his reaction wasn't what she expected. He didn't panic. He didn't rage. He didn't suggest solutions that would have broken her heart. Instead, he got down on his knees in that hidden clearing, took her hands in his and said, "Marry me." What? Marry me. Tonight. Right now. We'll find a way to make it work. I'll convince my father Ezekiel, your father will never accept this. He'll see it as a betrayal. Then we'll run. We'll go somewhere neither family can find us. We'll start over. You can't leave. You're his only heir. Your people need you. I need you more. She was crying now. Tears she hadn't shed since she was a child. Tears she'd sworn she would never shed again. I love you, she said. More than I ever thought I could love anything. But I won't be the reason you lose everything. You're not the reason. You're the only thing that makes any of it worth having. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way. But fate, as always, had other plans. Someone had been watching them. A servant named Solomon, who had always resented Clementine's rise from nothing to the Alpha's inner circle. He had seen them together. He had heard their plans. And he had gone straight to Jedediah Blackwood with everything he knew. The next morning, soldiers came for Clementine before dawn. They dragged her from her bed, ignoring her protests, and threw her at the feet of the old Alpha. Jedediah's face was terrible in his rage. Cold and still and absolutely merciless. "You seduced my son," he said. "You wormed your way into my territory, into my home, and you seduced my heir. It wasn't seduction. We love each other. Love." He spat the word like poison. "Love is a weakness. Love is a tool. And you, Ashford witch, used it to destroy my bloodline. I'm carrying his child. Your grandchild. Does that mean nothing to you?" Something flickered in his eyes. A moment of hesitation, perhaps even hope, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "That child is an abomination. Half Ashford, half Blackwood. It belongs to neither world and cannot exist in either." "Father, no." Ezekiel burst through the tent entrance, fighting past the guards who tried to hold him back. He threw himself between Clementine and his father, his body a shield. "If you hurt her, you'll have to kill me first. Don't tempt me, boy. I mean it. She's innocent. She didn't seduce me, I pursued her. I fell in love with her. If anyone is to blame, it's me." Jedediah's eyes narrowed. "You would defy me. For her. For an Ashford. I would defy anyone for her. I would defy God himself." Father and son stared at each other, and for one terrible moment, Clementine thought Jedediah might actually kill them both. But he didn't. Instead he smiled, that terrible knowing smile, and said, "Bring me the Ashford Border Patrol's position. Tonight. We're going to use this situation to our advantage." Clementine's blood ran cold. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to send you home, girl. As a gift. As bait." "Father." Ezekiel started. "Silence." Jedediah's voice cracked like a whip. "You will be confined to your quarters until this is done. And if you try to interfere, I will have her killed in front of you before she ever reaches the border. Do you understand?" Ezekiel was shaking with rage and despair. But he nodded. 'Cause he had no choice. They dragged Clementine away as she screamed his name, and the last thing she saw was Ezekiel's face, tears streaming down his cheeks, his hand reaching for her as the guards held him back. And so we return to where our story began. The border. The knife at her throat. The rogue who didn't know what to do with her. Jedediah had thrown her to the wolves. Literally. The rogue territories were no man's land, controlled by criminals and outcasts from both sides. They answered to no one and respected nothing except strength and profit. Clementine was meant to be bait, drawing her father's forces into an ambush. Jedediah would destroy the Ashford border patrols and then deny any involvement. Just a tragedy in the wasteland. Just another casualty of the eternal war. But the rogue with the knife, a man called Zachariah, was looking at her with an expression that wasn't quite murderous. "You said you're carrying the Blackwood heir," he repeated slowly. "Yes. And they threw you out anyway. Jedediah Blackwood would rather have no heir than an heir with Ashford blood." Zachariah lowered the knife. "That man," he said slowly, "is even more of a fool than I thought." And for the first time since her capture, Clementine felt a flicker of hope. Zachariah was not what she expected. He had been a Blackwood soldier once, one of Jedediah's most trusted lieutenants. But he'd objected to an order to slaughter civilians during a raid, and for that sin he'd been cast out, branded as a traitor, left to die in the wasteland. But he hadn't died. He'd survived, thrived even. He'd gathered other outcasts around him, men and women from both territories who had been rejected, abandoned, forgotten. Together, they'd built something new in the lawless borderlands. Not quite a territory, but not quite nothing either. "I'll protect you," Zachariah told Clementine. "You and your child. On one condition." "What condition?" "You help me build something better. Something that's not Ashford or Blackwood. Something that belongs to the people who've been thrown away by both." Clementine considered the offer. She was alone, pregnant, hunted by both her father's soldiers and her lovers. She had no resources, no allies, no hope. But she had something else. She had knowledge. Years of watching, learning, understanding how power worked and why it failed. Years of dreaming about a world where children like her wouldn't be forgotten. "I'll help you," she said. "But I want one thing in return." "Name it." "If Ezekiel comes for me, and he will come, you don't hurt him. You let me see him. You let us talk." Zachariah studied her for a long moment. "You really love him, don't you? Even after his father threw you away." "Jedediah isn't Ezekiel. The son is not the father." "No," Zachariah agreed softly. "No, I suppose he isn't." He extended his hand, and Clementine shook it. The alliance was formed. Now all she had to do was survive long enough for Ezekiel to find her. 300 miles away, Ezekiel Blackwood was breaking every rule he'd ever known. His father had confined him to quarters with guards at every exit. He'd been stripped of his weapons, his authority, his dignity. He was a prisoner in his own home. But he was also his mother's son. And his mother had taught him something that his father never understood. There is always another way. The tunnel had been built generations ago, during an earlier war when the camp was under siege. It connected to a system of caves that emerged 3 miles north, far beyond the patrol lines. Only the Alpha and his heir knew it existed. Jedediah had shown it to Ezekiel when he was 16, making him swear never to reveal it to anyone. "This is our last resort," his father had said. "The secret that could save our bloodline." Ezekiel wondered what his father would think when he discovered his son had used it to run toward an Ashford instead of away from one. He crawled through the darkness for what felt like hours, his hands raw and bleeding, his lungs burning with dust and stale air. When he finally emerged into the moonlight, he collapsed onto the cold ground and laughed. He was free. Now he just had to find her. The border was 300 miles away. In between lay enemy territory, bandit camps, wilderness, and weather that would kill an unprepared man in days. Ezekiel had a rifle, a knife, and the clothes on his back. He didn't care. Every step took him closer to Clementine. Every mile was one less standing between him and the woman he loved. He would walk through hellfire if he had to. And in a way he did. On the second day, he was attacked by Ashford scouts who recognized his face from wanted posters. He killed 2 and escaped the third only by jumping off a cliff into a river that nearly drowned him. On the 5th day, he stumbled into a bandit ambush and had to fight his way out, taking a knife wound to his side that wouldn't stop bleeding. On the 7th day, fever took him. He collapsed in a burned-out farmhouse and spent 2 days in delirium, dreaming of Clementine's face, her voice, her hands on his skin. When he woke, there was an old woman tending his wounds. "You talk in your sleep," she said. "You kept calling for someone named Clementine. Told her you were coming. Told her to hold on. I have to find her. You have to heal first. You'll be dead in a day if you keep traveling like this. Then I'll be dead. But I'll be closer to her when it happens." The old woman shook her head. "You young fools. So desperate to die for love. I'm not dying for love. I'm living for it. That's the difference." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's a faster route. Through the old mines. It'll cut 3 days off your journey, but it's dangerous. Cave-ins, gas pockets, things that live in the dark. Show me." And so an old woman who had lost her own children to the endless war helped a young man who was trying to end it, or at least escape it. Kindness, Ezekiel realized, could be found in the strangest places. Clementine was showing now. 2 months in the rogue territory had changed her. She'd grown stronger, more confident. She'd helped Zachariah organize his scattered band into something resembling a community. She'd taught children to read and adults to negotiate. She'd become, in a way she never could have imagined, a leader. But every night she dreamed of Ezekiel. She dreamed of his voice, his touch, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. She dreamed that he was coming for her, that he was close, that she could almost feel him. And then one evening the dream became reality. The scout came running into camp just as the sun was setting. "Someone at the perimeter," he shouted. "One man, alone, unarmed. Says he's looking for someone named Clementine." Her heart stopped. "Let him through," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But, let him through." She was running before she even made the conscious decision to move. Running through the camp, past the fires and the tents and the confused faces, running toward the perimeter where a single figure stood silhouetted against the dying light. He looked terrible. Thin and ragged, with a bandage around his torso stained with old blood. His clothes torn and filthy. His face gaunt with exhaustion. But his eyes, those beautiful midnight eyes, they were blazing with something that made her legs almost give out beneath her. "Clementine," he breathed. And then she was in his arms. She didn't know who moved first. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling of his body against hers, the sound of his heartbeat against her ear, the way his hands trembled as they touched her face. "You're alive," he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "I thought I was so afraid. I'm here. I'm here, and I'm never leaving again." He kissed her. A desperate, hungry kiss that tasted of salt and dust and survival. When he finally pulled back, his eyes dropped to the swell of her belly, and his expression shifted into something like wonder. "Our child," he whispered. "Our child." He knelt down, pressing his forehead to her stomach, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm here, little one. I'm here, and I promise I will never let anyone hurt you or your mother again. Do you hear me? Never." Clementine ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. This was it. This was what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not a territory, not a bloodline, not wealth or power or recognition. Just this, just love. But love, as they both knew, was never simple. Ezekiel's escape would have been discovered within hours of his departure. By now, Jedediah would have sent soldiers to bring him back, or to kill him. The war between the Ashfords and the Blackwoods was about to get much, much worse. "We can't stay here," Clementine said. "Your father will find us eventually. And my father, if he discovers I'm alive, he'll come too. Not to save me. To silence me. Then we run. We find somewhere neither of them can reach us. The far territories, maybe, or across the sea. And leave Zachariah's people to be caught in the crossfire. We can't." Ezekiel looked at the camp around them. The families gathered at fires, the children playing in the dirt, the outcasts who had found something like home. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "I'm suggesting we end this. Not by running but by fighting. Not with weapons, but with something more powerful." "What?" Clementine took his hand and placed it on her belly. "This child is half Ashford and half Blackwood. The bloodlines that have been at war for generations, united in a single person. If we can get both territories to recognize this child as legitimate, they'll never agree to that. Not willingly. But there are people in both territories who are tired of war. People who've lost children, siblings, parents. People who would choose peace if someone gave them the option." Ezekiel stared at her. "You want to start a revolution. I want to end a war. Whatever it takes." He was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled, that beautiful transformative smile that made her fall in love with him in the first place. "You know," he said, "when you said you were going to be trouble, I don't think I appreciated the full scope of what you meant. Are you with me? Always. Until the end of everything." She kissed him again, and as the sun set over the borderlands, they began to plan. Building a revolution takes time. They started with the rogues, Zachariah's people, who had nothing to lose and everything to gain from an end to the conflict that had destroyed their lives. They became the core of the movement, the heart of something new. Then came the defectors, people from both territories who crossed the border in the night, seeking asylum with the rogues. Some were soldiers who'd had enough of killing. Some were families who'd lost too much to the endless raids. Some were idealists who believed in the dream Clementine and Ezekiel were building. Word spread, whispered from village to village, camp to camp. There's a place in the borderlands where the war doesn't reach. There's a woman with Ashford blood and a man with Blackwood blood, and they're building something new. There's a child coming, a child of both lines, and that child will change everything. Not everyone believed. Many dismissed it as fantasy, wishful thinking, the delusions of fools and dreamers. But some believed, and some was enough to start. The child was born on a night of thunder and lightning, as if the sky itself knew something momentous was happening. Clementine labored for 12 hours, with Ezekiel at her side the entire time, holding her hand and telling her she was the strongest person he'd ever known. When it was over, and the baby's first cry pierced the air, Clementine felt something shift inside her. This was what she had been born for. Not war. Not power. Not revenge. A child with gray-green Ashford eyes and midnight Blackwood hair, screaming at the world with all the fury and determination of both bloodlines. They named her Hope, because that's what she was. That's what she represented. The hope that things could be different. That hatred didn't have to be inherited. That love could triumph over war. "She's perfect," Ezekiel whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "She's ours," Clementine replied. "And we're going to give her a world worth living in." It happened 3 months after Hope's birth. Both Jedediah Blackwood and Obadiah Ashford came for them at the same time, their armies converging on the borderlands from opposite directions, ready to annihilate the rogue settlement and everyone in it. They expected to find a ragtag group of outcasts, easily crushed. What they found was an army. Hundreds of people from both territories, armed and organized and absolutely united in their determination to protect what they'd built. They stood shoulder to shoulder, former enemies who had become allies, former strangers who had become family. And at their head stood Clementine and Ezekiel, with their daughter in their arms. "Father," Ezekiel called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "This ends today. One way or another." Jedediah rode forward, his face a mask of fury. "You dare to defy me, boy. You dare to bring this abomination before me. Her name is Hope. She's your granddaughter. And she is not an abomination, she's the future." From the other side, Obadiah Ashford approached as well, his expression calculating and cold. "So this is where you ran to, girl," he said. "The bastard daughter I never wanted, now queen of a dirt-poor rebellion. How fitting." "I am your daughter," Clementine replied, "whether you wanted me or not. And I'm going to do something you never could. I'm going to build something that lasts." For a long, terrible moment, the two armies stood on the brink of massacre. Then a child's cry split the silence. Hope, woken by the noise, was wailing in her mother's arms, a sound so pure and so innocent that it seemed to cut through the hatred and the fear. And in that moment something shifted. A soldier in the Blackwood army lowered his weapon. Then another. Then a dozen more. A woman in the Ashford forces called out, "I won't kill children. I won't be part of this anymore." One by one, people on both sides began to turn away, began to lay down their arms, began to walk toward the rogue settlement. Not everyone, not most, but enough. Enough to change the tide. Enough to make the old alphas realize that their power was slipping away. Jedediah looked at his son, at the child in Clementine's arms, at the people who were abandoning his cause. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," Ezekiel said quietly. "It is." Obadiah had a different response. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Clementine. But before he could fire, a shot rang out from the rogue lines. Zachariah, who had been watching from the shadows, had finally taken his revenge on the man whose orders had destroyed his life. Obadiah Ashford fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. And the war, the endless, pointless, devastating war, was finally over. Took years to build the peace. Not everyone accepted it. There were holdouts and insurgents, bitter old soldiers who couldn't let go of their hatred. Jedediah died a year after the confrontation, consumed by his own rage and unable to adapt to a world that no longer needed his cruelty. But slowly, painfully, something new took shape. The borderlands became a neutral territory, governed by a council of representatives from all three groups: Ashford, Blackwood, and the rogues who had become their bridge. Ezekiel and Clementine led by example rather than force. They opened trade routes and schools. They rebuilt the villages that had been destroyed by decades of conflict. They raised their daughter to understand both sides of her heritage and to reject the hatred that had divided them. Hope grew up strong and wise, with her mother's cunning and her father's courage. And on the day she came of age, she stood before the United Territories and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "I am the daughter of war. I was born from hatred and bloodshed and betrayal. But I choose to be something different. I choose love over fear, peace over conflict, hope over despair. And I ask all of you to make the same choice." The cheers that followed shook the mountains. Years later, when Clementine was old and gray and her bones ached with the memory of all she had endured, a young woman came to ask her a question. "How did you do it?" the woman asked. "How did you survive being thrown away, being used as bait, being hunted by everyone who should have loved you?" Clementine smiled, that same fierce, unbroken smile she'd worn all her life. "I didn't survive," she said. "Surviving is just enduring. What I did was live. I found people worth living for. I built something worth living for. And I refused to let anyone else's hatred determine my story." But weren't you afraid? Every single day. Fear isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The trick is not letting it make your decisions for you. The young woman nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "One more question," she said. "If you could go back to that first night, the night you ran into Ezekiel in the forest, with a rifle at your face and death in your future, would you change anything?" Clementine looked out the window, where her husband of 40 years was playing with their grandchildren in the garden. Where Hope stood with her own daughter on her hip. Where the territory that had once been a wasteland now bloomed with life and possibility. "Not a single thing," she said. "Not a single solitary thing." And that, dear listeners, is the story of how a woman thrown to the rogue border as bait became the mother of a new world. It's a story about love, yes, but it's also about courage. About choosing to be more than what others expect of you. About finding your family not in blood, but in the people who see you, value you, and refuse to let you go. Clementine Ashford was told she was nobody her entire life. She proved them wrong. And Ezekiel Blackwood, the heir who crossed enemy lines just to sleep in her arms again. He proved that love isn't weakness. It's the strongest force in the world. If you've made it this far in the story, I want you to know something. You matter too. Whatever wilderness you're walking through right now, whatever enemies are at your back, whatever impossible odds you're facing, you matter. And just like Clementine, you have the power to write your own story. Now, don't forget to drop that comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I read every single one, and I meant what I said about sending you a virtual